That is exactly. We will be aight. All right. Welcome everybody to episode 24 of UBI. We've got a special guest today, Teddy Toyosaki. I realize I've never said that out loud. I hope I
But you
got that
nailed it. You got it. You nailed it. Most people just give up. They try to say it all at one time, and they get way, and it just comes out. Bleh, and so you nailed it.
Okay, that's awesome. Well, Teddy, I guess we can let you kind of just introduce yourself real quick. Just kind of like, just you could just say who you are, where you're from, what you do. I don't know, but however you want to introduce yourself, but just let the people know.
Yeah, sure. Well, first off, just thank you so much for inviting me. I'm really loving the content you guys are putting out there. As we were talking in the discussion pre-show, I've got opinions on your opinions, and I brought my legal pad of all of my notes. So we're gonna have a lot to discuss. A lot to discuss here. I have no clue why you've brought me on your show. The way I tell people is that I'm just some kid from the rock in the middle of the ocean. I have no real natural skills or talents, and so I make up for it with enthusiasm. The first time I met Manny was actually in the Libel show, right? And he was in the front of the camera, but with my face, they put me kind of holding the boomstick, which is the guy who holds the sound bar, right? Which is so yeah, I went to UVA Law, class of 2016, and now
Manny was in the Libel show.
I was in the Libel show the last year. For those who don't know, the Libel show at UVA Law is like a comedy show that we put on with like skits about the law school and just the life of being a lawyer. And some of the stuff is like pre-recorded, and then some of it's live. I actually didn't get to go to the live show that year, which I kind of missed, but I was in one of those videos that we did. And actually one of the first pictures you and I have on Facebook is someone took a picture of me recording that and you holding the boomstick. So I think that's how we became friends.
Yeah, you like reached out to me on Facebook after, right? No, exactly. Like me, like quiet, like holding it up, like my shoulders are getting real tired, and they're like, okay, let's take it again. Let's do it. Like holding up this boomstick, and my arms are shaking. And it was called Clerkships, right? It was Clerkships. Which is like a Cialis kind of commercial. And your father figure, the dad judge, right? I believe is the
Judge Dad, Kevin.
Judge Dad, yeah.
Kevin Benedicto. Is that how you say? Is it Benedicto?
Yeah.
Just for those who don't know, these kids from the Libel show put the Dave Chappelle show to shame. So
that's right. That's right. Dave Chappelle used the Libel show to make his show. He was a big fan.
Exactly.
Not a lot of people don't know that, but
I mean,
SNL, same thing.
It's the thing about the Libel show. Actually, it's one of the reasons I chose UVA Law. This is like a true story. I did not actually research UVA before I got accepted to UVA. I was just told by a family friend, like, oh, you should apply there. It's a great school. And I was like, okay. And then I applied, and then I got accepted. And then that's when I then I Googled UVA Law for the first time. It's kind of bizarre. And it's like the rationale behind my choice was like, orange and blue, not a great color scheme. That was like part of the thing that was like, that's kind of my logic. So when I did my pros and cons, in selecting schools, color scheme was like on the it's like, oh, orange and blue. What is a Cavalier? Yeah, no, that's on the cons. But then like proximity to barbecue locations, like that was a pro. Because in Virginia you have Tennessee, you have the Carolinas, right? You can kind of road trip around. So that was a big pro. But Libel show, when I YouTubed UVA Law, it was one of the first things that came up. And it was like so hilarious. There's the first thing that I saw was a video about the negotiator, and it has to deal with this transaction, this commercial transaction, and it's this just awful negotiator who's so bad that he's like amazing, right? And it was just so brilliant. And they have no constitution. I mean, there's just such great pieces, and I ended up just laughing. And I was living in rural Japan at the time. And like,
wait, really? Interesting.
Yeah. So before law school, I was a teacher. I taught in the JET program, right? In rural Japan, in the snowiest city on the planet, where there is more snow, there are no people, because sensible people do not live where there is that much snow. So I lived in this rice field, like applying to law schools, right? And true story. And from this rice field in the middle of nowhere, in like, there's snow 5 months, of the year, and I'm talking like walking up to your knee in snow all the time, right? And
Jesus.
I saw this YouTube clip and I just commented and said, like, this is amazing. And if this is the type of place that has a humor like this, it seems like a really wonderful place. And I just got accepted. And within 30 minutes, someone said, congratulations, it's a wonderful place. You'll love it. Welcome, And it was like, within 30 minutes, and it was an old video from like years prior. And I just felt this sense of warmth. And so that was kind of like, that started me on the path of like, maybe I should really look into this UVA place. So, but for the libel show and but for that stranger commenting, who knows what my path would be.
Stranger was just waiting for someone to comment on the video for like 7 years.
Now's my chance, right? Yeah.
Exactly. Let's back up a little bit.
Sure.
Like, how the hell did you find yourself in rural Japan? Like, you can't just
yeah.
Happiest place on earth, like, and just pretend like, oh, we're not gonna ask. No. Yeah. Whoa. Like, yeah. What's the background for that?
Yeah. Okay. So when I say I'm from a rock in the middle of the ocean, I'm from Hawaii. I'm from Honolulu, Hawaii, on Oahu.
Okay.
And I'm Japanese American. I'm sure at some point we're going to talk about what's going on in America today. With respect to what happens to people with my face, right?
That's not why I reached out to you, by the way. When you brought that up, I'm like, oh god, now he's gonna think I like. Who do I know that's Asian? Let me get them on the podcast.
Well, first off, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I'm just very sensitive to that. Like, I hate when like shit happens in the news to black people, and all of a sudden everybody wants to talk to me. Like, so I'm like, I hope Teddy doesn't think it was completely not related. But
and we'll get to that when we get to that. But prior to that, I was finishing up at the University of Hawaii, and I did my last semester working for Senator Inoue through a fellowship. So I was working for the late great Senator Inoue, and needed to figure out what I wanted to do with after college. And the JET program is now, I guess, probably 35 years now. At this point, but basically, Japanese education system realized, like, how can we improve our English abilities, right? So 35 years ago, they realized, okay, we need to speak English. We need to have our citizens being able to speak English to, transact with the rest of the world. How can we improve their English abilities? Oh, let's bring native English speakers, college graduates to come and be in the classroom. And so that was the idea behind that. And so I applied. I interviewed at the embassy in DC and got in. And I ended up being placed in Aomori. And just in terms of timing, this was like right when 3/11 happened, right? So the Tohoku, like, the tsunami and the nuclear reactor disaster, right?
Yeah.
So this was like right before that. So it was just like, oh crap, do I actually want to go to Tohoku, that area where like there's like this nuclear radiation disaster, right? So it was kind of a scary, like, uncertain time, but
I don't want to. I'm probably just going to embarrass myself. But 3/11. Sorry. What is that? What exactly happened?
I don't know what the hell you're talking about.
I was like, I think it's 9/11, Teddy.
Yeah. So March 11, 2011.
Okay.
Was that tsunami that hit the east coast of Japan?
Okay.
That knocked out. And then, if you recall, like the nuclear reactors, the Daiichi, Fukushima Daiichi, and Daini reactors like shut down. And so, at that time, when I was working for Senator Inoue, like,
man, still doesn't remember that. Like,
it's okay though, but that's enough information for me to get context for the story.
But anyway, just go ahead, Teddy.
But yeah, so I mean, it's a very, very scary time. So when I'm in Washington D.C. working for Senator Inoue, and there was like there was a briefing on nuclear reactors, and every Senate office sent one person, and so the chief of staff was like, Teddy, you can go and take notes. And so I got to sit in on this, like, everyone freaking out, like, especially from California, like, how does this affect us? What about our nuclear reactors? So it was really kind of interesting to kind of to be in DC at the time when it's, we're discussing, like, how are we going to deal with that if that ever happens to us? And it was just one of those things where it was like really bad timing, where you have an earthquake and a tsunami happening bang, bang. And had one happened and not the other, it would have been okay. But just because it was the nature of the succession of an earthquake and a tsunami at the same time, that the security features of Fukushima, Daiichi, and Daini basically fell apart. And so that it was just a really really unfortunate series of events. And so, Japan was in a rebuilding stage at that point, right? And if you recall, that was the summer where they had the Women's World Cup, and Japan ended up beating America. And it's not dissimilar in so many ways to like what happened with, with the Saints, winning Super Bowl right after Katrina, right? And you really need that boost, where it's almost like there's some kind of divine entity that is, flicking the soccer ball just a little bit off, right? Because I mean, USA should have won, but it felt like everything was just a couple inches to the wrong, and Japan ended up winning, and they really needed that as a country. And so I ended up, flying to Japan to start working in August right after that. So kind of that rebuilding stage. I was in a very, very poor town, Namioka, and it was a place where kids, everyone has this view of Japan and the cleanliness. And Manny, when you went to travel to Japan, I sent you all the notes of things to do, and I think it's a wonderful, wonderful place. I love it, and I studied abroad there. I lived there. But Namioka and Aomori, it's sort of Upper Peninsula, Michigan winter meets Mississippi's like healthcare and educational outcomes with Montana. So that's kind of what it's like. But I love the place, right?
That is so fascinating, because when I do think of Japan, you think of Tokyo, you think of basically Times Square, but everybody's speaking Japanese or whatever, and like the glamour and the glitz, and that's kind of what I saw as a tourist. But it is interesting. Like, what was that like for you? Had you visited any places that were rural or poor in Japan prior to this, or was this like kind of a rude awakening for you?
I think that's a great question. I mean, I did my study abroad in Tokyo, and so that was that was like the best year of my life. It was just every weekend was just like, oh, look at all the bright lights, and there's so much going on. I mean, you know that when you've been to Tokyo, man. And like, have you been to Tokyo by any chance? It is like nuts.
No. So yes. I was supposed to go to Japan that around the time that the disaster happened. So that's why that is always memory. And I just ended up then going because that happened. So but anyway, yeah.
So I mean, Tokyo is so different, right? And like these rural places, to answer your question, Manny, like my family. So I spent like the year that I was studying abroad in 2008, 2009, that like winter break for New Year's, my mom was like, you need to go and stay with like your third cousins, right? Like these, distant relatives down in Yamaguchi Prefecture. And that's pretty boondocks, like out there, like, countryside. And, they're Japanese, and my Japanese is awful, but like, it's pretty country bumpkinish. And I'm not afraid to say that out loud, because I'm pretty sure none of them are going to be listening to this podcast. There's a very little chance that I'm going to get yelled at by some.
We have some huge following in rural Japan that we don't even know about.
Exactly. You guys are like huge in Yamaguchi Prefecture. But it's, I spent some time there, and it was really like sort of life-changing, right? Just going out and just living out in the countryside where, the grocery store is an hour away, that kind of, situation. And so definitely there are other places. And I think it's really interesting. The Japanese American experience, a lot of the different episodes you guys talked about, the diaspora from different places, and you talked about like the Black Exodus. And I always think about those kinds of things of like, where are people coming from, right? It's not just like, oh, people are coming from, Poland. It's not just like, oh, people come from China. It's not just people come from Japan or whatever. It's like within Japan, all Japanese Americans so like my family came in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And all of the people who look like me and have last names like me, who came during that period, they're not leaving because, they're the professional class and doing very, very well, right? They're like laborers and farmers, and they are looking for more opportunity, right? And so like all of the Japanese Americans who came with that wave, like they're all coming from the same prefectures, and usually in the south of Japan. And so kind of more, rural places like Yamaguchi and Kumamoto. And so it's certainly not people coming from Tokyo. It's not
Got you. So,
from the north. Yeah.
so your family came to Hawaii in, you said, the late 1800s, early 1900s?
Yep. Yeah.
Nice.
So it's I don't know what you guys know about Hawaii plantations, but that was why so many people came to Hawaii, right? Is to work on the plantations. So sugarcane, everyone thinks pineapples, and just if you want to know my thoughts on pineapple and pizza, and hopefully we talk about pizza at some point, but pineapple on pizza is atrocious.
Let me say this: I hate pineapple on pizza, but
it's crazy, and it's Canadian. It's Canadian. That's the thing, right?
That's a Canadian invention?
Yeah, it's a Canadian invention.
Those damn Canadians. Oh my gosh.
That's Canadian bacon. And pineapple.
Which is just ham. You can't rename something that already exists and just say, oh, this is Canadian. No, this is ham.
It's ham. Right, exactly.
You just took circular ham and started calling it.
Pizza didn't have the same cachet as Hawaiian pizza, right? And so, everyone certainly thinks of pineapple as being connected to Hawaii. Fun fact, 99% of pineapple production is actually done in the Philippines now. So we have very little pineapple. It's like you have the Dole plantation and you can get your Dole whip, and that's about it right now. But what was really, really big was the sugar cane, right? That was why you have this massive diaspora to Hawaii. And, looking back, I think this is a perfect segue actually into racism, because I think, when I joked earlier, you brought me on here to talk about the Asian American experiences, what's going on with Stop Asian Violence.
Which is not true.
I got the okay from the Brotherhood, the Asian Brotherhood. They've given me, authorization to sign off on all things, but I represent my views and my views alone. And I think more so, it's even more kind of niche in that it is my experience as an Asian American is so different than, a kid who grew up in California, a kid who grew up in Philly, a kid who grew up in, in even Northern Virginia, look like me, but totally different experience. And I think a big part of that has to do with that plantation experience, right? So let's go back in time, 60s, where the first wave of Chinese immigrants come over, and then you bring in the next wave of Japanese followed, and you have Koreans, Filipinos coming in, and you have people coming from Puerto Rico, and they're all working on these plantations, right? Owned by the children and grandchildren of the white New Englanders who came bringing the word of God and the Bible. Right, so the missionaries came, and then their kids ended up owning everything. Right, this should not shock you. Right, this should not be shocking. And so they needed laborers, and so that's where you have all of this Asian migration coming to help to work on the plantations. But I got my talking notes, guys. Hold on, let me see. It was.
I don't know if we mentioned Teddy is the most prepared guest we've ever had. Probably will ever.
Yeah. Episode 10, you guys talked about the poor white overseers and how blacks and whites were working together, and then the wealthy whites realized we need to actually create this hierarchical structure and put poor whites on top, right, as overseers. And that's exactly what happened in Hawaii. That is exactly what happened with the Portuguese. So the Portuguese became middle management, and everyone knows nobody likes middle management, right? So middle management. The Portuguese, the Lunas, and the WASP white people. These Portuguese are not quite as white as us, but they're not Asian or Hawaiian or whatever. So they can be kind of that middle middle management role. And so as a result, all jokes in Hawaii, are all, number one, they're all racial. It's usually a Japanese guy, a Hawaiian guy, and a Portuguese guy walk into a bar. Right. And the Portuguese guy is always the butt of the joke. So we don't have Polish jokes. We don't have blonde jokes. We don't have black jokes. It's like Portuguese people. They are who everyone makes fun of. And it goes back to that plantation experience, right, of having this kind of common middle person who.
This is fascinating as hell. So, how the hell did the Portuguese, coming from Africa, I know the atrocities that the Portuguese, I would say the Portuguese government, because, whatever, their role in slavery and all of that stuff, all the way to Brazil. But I didn't know anything about, them being in Hawaii. So they weren't really the slave owners or the
workers
in Hawaii, so to speak. They were kind of You call them middle management. That is a fascinating word. That's like a corporate word.
Yeah, that is interesting. I guess you would analogize them to the poor whites here.
Yeah. Yeah, but what's that history? Like, how did they get to a white? You know what I'm saying? Like I'm trying to like wrap that around. Like I'm trying to walk that even geographically in my head.
Right.
It's a long flight, or
I think that's a really great question, and I actually should probably have researched that before anticipating that question. That what I do know is that there are Portuguese communities like in the Massachusetts region, my understanding. And so when the New Englanders came, bringing the gospel, presumably there was also a flow coming. I could be totally wrong, and hopefully some Hawaiian historian reads this or listens to this.
We have a lot of Hawaiian historians.
Yeah, exactly. I figured that was.
So someone will get us in the comments.
Right.
Like actually.
Right.
That makes sense. That makes sense because there's a big. You're right. There's a big Portuguese, contingent in New England and even Cape Verde. Like the big Cape Verdean contingent in Boston area, New England. Wow, that is fascinating.
But it's interesting how everyone makes fun of middle management. I mean, I guess here you think about it, like a lot of people make fun of Southern backwards poor white people. It sounds similar to that. You know what I mean? Like, are they the Trump supporters of Hawaii? I don't know. the caricature of a Trump supporter in Hawaii. Because by the way, all Trump supporters were not poor white people.
Right.
But exactly. We're very rich white people. and
Lil Wayne, right? Manny knows that I was a Lil Wayne fan for a very long time. The Carter 2, one of the greatest albums. Oh my gosh. Fly In, the Carter 2.
Oh my gosh, the Carter 2 and then Fly Out.
And look on YouTube, people like put it together. It's so good.
I haven't listened to that actually. I have to find that.
They just string them together, so there's like no stopping, and it's just like one like very long song, and it's so good. And it's so crazy. Good. Like going back to Hawaii, there's the Hawaii radio stations back in the early 2000s, mid 2000s. When I was in like middle school, high school, like there's like 3 stations, and they all just play the same 5 songs, and it's like and it was always like the Fireman. That was like the only song they would play from it. All these Hawaii people like, oh, Fireman, it's so great, and it's like, no, that
might be the worst song on the album.
Exactly.
Stop playing that. That's not a good song.
Exactly. Right, and so Manny knows this, but like after I got the Carter 2, I was like, oh my gosh, and then I got Carter, the first one, and then The Block Is Hot, and then was like waiting, and the day that the Carter 3 dropped, I got it, and it went like quadruple.
Whatever,
it broke every, and it was like, it was okay. I mean, the Carter 2 is better in my humble.
And his mixtapes are really good. I think the Carter 3 was just kind of an exclamation point. Like, I am the best rapper. It wasn't the best, but it was like, let me get this commercial success, because he had a lot of mixtapes that technically wouldn't have counted for like, the sales records and all that stuff. So that was his commercial success, I guess. I think it sold 1 million in like the first week, which in 2008 is a big deal because people were stealing music by then. So the fact that 1 million people bought that the first week was pretty insane.
All right, let's get back on track.
Sorry. Lil Wayne has a lot to do with the Portuguese in Hawaii. If you really see, they're connected.
Lil Wayne has a Portuguese last name.
So the only reason I know, well, actually, I can make a couple connections here. First, the only reason I know about the Portuguese community in like the Massachusetts, New England area is because they have malasada, which is like their Portuguese donut. And it is like the in Hawaii.
So good.
Yeah, malasada is like
Leonard's, right? Leonard's the bakery has that. Shout out to Leonard's.
Shout out to Leonard's. They're so good, right? And so I was like, oh wow, malasada exists there, right? So there's this connection. But what I can make a connection to Hawaii and Lil Wayne is so for work, so I'm a federal employee. I work for the Department of Energy. A couple shout outs. The group that I work on does a lot of the emergency response stuff. So Houston, you guys were slammed in the winter storm. We were working all like throughout that. That was a very, very rough week because we were just up taking calls at 2:30 a.m. trying to send stuff off to the White House, National Security Council. It was just kind of crazy. But that's for another time. I don't really want to talk too much. But our team name is GC76, and it's just like a mailing code. And so one of the things very early on when I joined the team was like, we need to rebrand. Let's call ourselves the 76ers. But please, Philadelphia 76ers, please do not steal. Like, please do not sue us. Like, we're just borrowing your intellectual property and your brand, but rebranding ourselves. And so
once we do so well, we're number one. Everybody wants our name. Nobody cared about us a couple years ago when we were last in the freaking East. But anyway.
But within the work that I do, one of the things that I do is support the Strategic Petroleum Reserve, which is down in Louisiana. The program office, the project management office is down there. And so I got to, go down back when it was safe to travel to meet all the people down there. And I just felt so at home. Like Louisiana and New Orleans, it feels so much like Hawaii. And so this is Lil Wayne from like NOLA. And it felt so much like Hawaii in so many ways. And I've told them that. And I think it's that sort of meshing of culture, even like Creole, like we have Hawaiian Pidgin, like Creole English. And that comes from all of these people on this plantation trying to communicate and like have like little bits of pieces of language being used. Japanese grammatical structure is like used with Hawaiian words thrown in English. And so, kind of in researching and thinking of what I wanted to talk about, when you guys in episode 1 talked about UBI and the history behind that with, the 3L who told you that, I thought that was amazing. And I was like, what do we say in Hawaii that is like the same concept? And the answer is, no worry, beef curry.
No worry, beef curry.
That sounds like Jamaican.
No worry, beef curry. And like, Google it. Don't believe me, but no worry, beef curry is like that same idea of like, don't worry about it. It's going to be okay. Like, what does beef curry have to do with it? I don't know. But maybe some Hawaiian historian, one of the many Hawaiian historians who watch your show, maybe they'll come in and comment on.
It doesn't have to mean anything. We have stuff like that in the Black community. I'm trying to think of something.
Nah, don't worry, beef curry. That sounds like Jamaican patois to me. Like,
no worry, beef curry.
Right, it might. Who knows, right? So
like it actually sounds like what we would say, like, because in Nigeria, we have like 200 languages and everybody speaks Pidgin English, right?
Right.
That just sounds like what we would say. I mean, it isn't exactly, Like as you were talking, I was thinking to myself, I wonder if someone that is tipped in Nigerian Pidgin meets an Hawaiian Pidgin person, like, would they be able to communicate?
I think Pidgin, it's so interesting that you have all these different people from all these different places and that they have this like universal language, like even with like the Black diaspora, and something I've been so jealous about, and I think I've talked about it on here, but like Lai could communicate with people from the Caribbean because they all spoke broken English, which was like this like universal language that like the Black diaspora speaks. And I was left out of because I'm African American, but like anyone like from the Caribbean or Africa, if you speak English, it's almost like you have this like cadence and the way you speak and vocabulary.
The funny thing is, a lot of the vocabulary in Pidgin also has like Portuguese words just sprinkled in it all over time. Of course, like they've been kind of like bastardized to the dialect of the specific areas, but we still understand each other, and all of the, I don't want to say like, all of the ways that you drag out the words and sentences and structures and everything is so similar that it's actually weird.
It is like, very strange.
Like you can understand most of what Jamaicans are saying, and the way they talk, like like the way you just drop words in there, it just makes sense into an English, but you're like, what the hell are you talking about?
Well, I should note at this point that I understand everything you're saying. I don't know what Manny's talking about. I understand everything that you said. And I was listening to the podcast at 2 times speed. So it's going really fast, and I understood everything. Operantly, I understand operantly.
Operantly. I understood it after the first couple of weeks. Operantly did trip me up, though. I'm not gonna lie. You had me stressed out. Like, I was like, I am not smart enough to be here. I've never even heard of this word. This guy's not even from this country, and yet he knows words I don't know. I Googled it. It like said, like had like the red thing underneath it said it was spelling wrong. I was like, Google doesn't even know this word. That's how smart this guy is. He's smarter than Google. I shouldn't be here. So.
Well, speaking of law school and like weird pronunciation, do you guys ever feel like the professors were purposely trolling you in how they pronounced words that should have been very like, for example, like
Yeah.
sovereignty,
There was a particular
sovereignty?
professor,
What are you talking
Mhm.
about? Like,
there was a
Yeah.
particular professor in my mind that was the main, was the main perpetrator of that. That was G. White. Like,
Yeah, I'm trying to think of examples, but I
like,
know exactly what you're talking about. Like, why did you? What is
why
it?
do you talk like that? Like,
Yeah.
why do you talk like that?
Stop
Like,
it! You know that's not how we pronounce this word.
yeah. And they're like the expert on it. So like if like they're like an international expert on this thing and they say sovereignty, now you feel like an idiot if you're like sovereignty. So now everyone else starts saying sovereignty and we all sound like morons. And it's like, what? It's so
Yeah,
crazy, Or
yeah,
my favorite thing about law school is like, it's like, oh, there's this 4-part test, and then they give you 5 different things. And it's like, or,
yeah.
4-part test. Here's 5, 6, 7. It's like, well, no, it's a 4-part test. There should only be 4. Like, this is not hard. It should be.
So I don't offend anyone. Do you guys say research or research?
I do the first.
Research, right? So like I hate when professors will be like say like research. It's like it's just a little off and you keep saying it and I think you think you're better than I am because of the way you said it. You know what I mean? Like research. I don't know.
Yeah.
How do you say it live?
uh,
It doesn't you can say research if that's how you decide because it's your second language.
see, one of the beautiful things about having an accent, and I've said this before, is you can just get away with everything. Like people will just assume that.
People assume that's how you pronounce it. Like, oh, I'm supposed to be saying it like that. I've been saying it wrong.
People will just make all sorts of assumptions about you. So it's like, okay, you know what? You be Aight. Like it is what it is.
Yeah. Especially people with like British accents are like, oh, is that how we're supposed to say it? Whatever.
Like, do you ever take advantage of that? Like, when you don't want to have to like answer something or?
Yeah, like I mean, I think I may have told some stories actually. I'm not remembering any specific examples right now, but there are many times when. So the way that I would typically take advantage of it is if, for instance, I remember I would do this a lot when I was at the law firm, and you have the partner saying bullshit stuff and whatnot, and everybody's afraid to say shit, like to say things or what. And I would just say whatever I want. Like I'll be like, okay, it makes sense. Like, why don't we do X, Y, or Z or whatever? And you will see the other associates or even the junior partners in the room like
You're like a summer.
I know that's what everybody else is thinking. Like, because maybe we've already talked about it, everybody's afraid. But I would just say it so as unassumingly and just pretend to be aloof. Now, to be fair, I'm also kind of aloof. I'm kind of aloof in real life, so it's not even an act. But I would just say I know I have an accent, and I know that whatever I'm saying is right. Is what everybody else is thinking, and there isn't really a way for this other person to count. So I would take advantage of it. I feel like if I was an American that has an American accent, I probably wouldn't necessarily be able to get away with that, if that makes sense.
Right.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. Annie, have you ever pretended to
have an accent? Nowadays, that gets you canceled. So I used to walk around doing Li's accent. No, I actually did, but I didn't do it at my job. That would be funny. Actually, I had a friend though in high school, and he was telling me about one of his friends who he was an Asian American, but he spoke English just fine, but he was cheating on a test. And when they went up to him about it, he pretended to speak broken English, and it worked. They just walked away. Oh, okay, sorry.
The only thing I ever contributed to the law school in the 3 years was in my 3rd year. I wrote a piece called "Cold Call Ninja."
I think I remember this, or maybe I've seen this.
So Cold Call Ninja was a piece that I wrote, a piecing together story. It was so easy to write because it was just what I saw in the classroom. And I think this is a perfect kind of bigger segue into what's going on in the world today with respect to kind of Asian resentment and violence. And going to UVA, you guys spoke about it in episode.
Yeah,
I think it was episode 5. I think it was episode 5.
Oh my God, this is great.
The decals and all that. But certainly going to UVA, I think I love the school. My girlfriend I met we were in section together. Some of my best friends are all from law school. But certainly there was, especially that first semester, right, where I was a member of the first year council, and it was like me and one other person, and we were the only two like people of color, and it was just kind of very obvious. And seeing that experience, and then even in libel, where they totally butchered my last name on the cast list, totally misspelled it, and it's like they didn't even try. And then the roles that I got were, nerdy male who is bad with women. And it was just like, really, you give me? I couldn't be the cool guy, like for once, just be the cool guy.
Yeah.
You know what I think? And then the second year, I'm holding the boomstick for you, and also the nerdy guy who can't get women. And I was just like, no one's gonna write my role for me that I want for myself. And so I just decided, like, I'm gonna write the role. I'm gonna write what I want to do. And so I became an assistant director. Whitney, my girlfriend, said she would break up with me if I went for director, which is kind of the truth. She's like, no, because you'll have no time for me. And I was like, so I became an assistant director, and I ended up writing this piece, and it was basically about the Asian American experience, because at that point, 108 shows, 108 years, no one had ever written a story about the Asian American experience, because quite frankly, no one cared, and that's fine, because why should someone else want to write a story about the Asian American experience if someone like me isn't going to be putting them to do that? So I wrote this piece starring me because I wanted a good role. So I wrote the role for myself, and then I wrote it so that there would be other Asians in parts, right? Asian parts. And so, and just like your comedy, testing it out at small clubs, I tested it out at the ALSA, right? The Asian Pacific American Law Students Association dinner. I would test it to see what the reaction was, so that I could at least, and they were like cracking up. So it's like, okay, good. I got buy-in from the community.
Right.
And I would test the material out everywhere I went, and then finally wrote it down on paper and put it in, and it became the anchor to the show at the, and I'm not to toot my own horn here, but at the post libel kind of review or whatever, it was consistently rated amongst all of the people in libel as their favorite skit. It is the only thing I have contributed to the law school. It was the only thing, meaningful contribution I've made to the law school. But basically, this is what it's all about. It's about a first-year Asian student who is terrified of cold calls. And I play the third-year student who's like, don't worry, there's all these strategies you can do to like get out. And it's taught as like a kung fu kind of like, the first technique is like, like a tree, like, don't move. And if you don't move, the professors can't see you because they only like see movement, and then the next one is just like, there's all these different techniques, and then ultimately the ultimate technique is just like pretend you're an LLM, and it was just all of the jokes were things that I saw in like the classroom,
right.
or my experience as an LLM PA, the peer advisor, talking to LLM students. Like, for example, real story, I was an LLM PA, and I ran into the president of the LLMs. His name is Wataru, and Japanese guy, quiet, super nice Japanese guy. And the reason he was president is because the French guy, a great friend of mine, like nominated the quiet Japanese guy when they were like, who should be the LLMs? It's like, Wataru should be the president. Like, it's like the one guy who's like so shy, like make him be the president, right? So Wataru, the shy guy, becomes president. So I ran into him second semester. I'm like, hey, Wataru, like, what's going on? How's everything going? And he's like, it's okay, but it's very, very difficult. Very, very, very difficult. And I'm like, constitution law? Oh, that's awful. Yeah, it's the worst. It's like hard for like native English speakers. It's awful. And he's like, actually, I got cold call last week in class. And I go, oh my God, you got cold called in class. What happened? And he said, professor asked, Mr. Wataru, Mr. Kurihara, what is, and ask question about the constitution. And I said, oh my gosh, were you prepared? Did you do the reading? And he said, oh, I didn't do the homework, the reading. No, I didn't do the reading. And I was like, well, so how did you answer? And he's like, I told professor, actually in Japan, this is the kind of law that I practice. And in the Japanese constitution, that is totally illegal. You cannot do this kinds of thing. and I said, oh, is that, I was like, Wataru, is that true? And he looked at me and he goes, I don't know, I made it up. That got incorporated into this skit. But instead of just that kind of basic thing, it was like I just went up and over and just like crazy.
That's amazing.
That guy won gold call.
That's great. And I love how that just came to you. Like that will happen with me in comedy. Like sometimes things just happen. It's like, this is perfect. This is just like from God. But that was great how that story happened and you could use that. That's hilarious. But it was nice that I like that you tried it out at Apolsa first. For those who don't know, it's the Asian American and Pacific Island. I don't know Asian American and Pacific Islander law school group of students at UVA. But I like how you got their buy-in, because I think like stuff like that's important, especially when you're talking about race to like a larger white audience. You always want to get buy-in from like your community and make sure you're not doing something that's like kind of fucked up. You know what I mean?
And I'm glad you bring that up. And the reason I wanted to mention that was, as you might imagine, there was tons of backlash on my jokes. There was some 1L, some super woke 1L who was like, this is so racist. Oh my God, it's probably some white guy who wrote this. And it's like, no, I wrote this. Like, I wrote this. This is like, I've been working on this for 3 years, just taking notes on things that I saw, right? And it was my way of, creating a role for myself, but also creating a role for other Asian Americans in the cast that I could, bring them in. And I wanted to make sure that I had buy-in, right, from people. And I mean, I would go to the national Asian Pacific American Bar Association like conference and like test it with like attorneys before I did this. So, I wanted to get buy-in from students. I wanted to get buy-in from like attorneys, like people I worked with during the summer, like kind of what the feeling was, right? And this wokester 1L was like trying to cancel me because she thought that I was a white guy who wrote this and it was so racist. And it's like, you don't understand the whole point. And like the reason I called it Cold Cold Ninja, and I think this is lost on so many people, is that a ninja is supposed to be invisible. And that was how I felt, right? Mm-hmm. And it was such a weird feeling because I'm from Hawaii, where I think episode 3, you guys talk about like being like feeling like you can do anything and there's no kind of cap and limit, and like being from Hawaii, where the highest rated Asian American, my former boss, Senator Inoue, who has an airport named after him, Japanese American. My grandma was his Sunday school teacher. Like, Patsy Mink, Title IX, Japanese American from Hawaii, right? Our governor, the heads of the banks, like they all look like me. So I kind of grew up thinking like, of course I should be able to become a senator, a U.S. senator, right? That, of course, right? And kind of seeing the different experience that Asian Americans like on the mainland have, it's very different. And I don't even know where really I'm going with this, but ultimately this idea of invisibility, when I went to UVA, I kind of felt that way a little bit. And it's sort of almost like pushed me to be even like louder and more like, I'm going to make friends with everybody, because that's the way that you can have these conversations. And I think, one of the things about Apolsa that I was not a huge fan of was, that it'd be all of these Asian people. You go to these meetings at a Chinese restaurant and it's just all of these Asian people, my white girlfriend, and that's it, right? There was like no diversity within the group. And it was very much sort of this insular kind of group. And I think that really, if we want to really make progress, having those alliances are so important, and having conversations and like having those interactions, even if they might be uncomfortable, are so important. And like my thesis is what makes Hawaii so special is not just the diversity, right? In like these air quotes, but like within a single person. Like, so for example, New Yorkers, I don't know if it's Queens that says that like, oh, we have more languages spoken here than anywhere else. Right. But it's very much like, this neighborhood, this this block is, Jamaicans, and this block are Chinese people, and this block are like, Jewish people, and this block are like Muslim people, and this block, Whereas in Hawaii, I have friends who are, every great grandparent came from a different country, right? And like you see that kind of, that within a person kind of, diversity within a single person. You see that in our food, right? You see that in our language. It's who we are, right? And I think that's what makes Hawaii so unique and so special. And I think having those conversations, like, the African American community, Asian American community, like having these conversations is so important, right? And going back to Cold Called Ninja being invisible, this idea of invisibility, right? It's if we want to talk about the Electoral College, which I'd love to talk about because I think it's two teddies. Northern Virginia, my vote matters. Hawaii doesn't matter at all. Same person.
It's true. Yeah, exactly.
But also, when you think about the election coverage, they're talking about the white vote, they're talking about the black vote, they're talking about the brown vote. They're talking about the white educated vote. They're talking about the white uneducated, non-college educated vote. They never talk about the Asian vote, right? When we're like 5.8% of the US population, which is enough to shift the total, right? It's enough to change the direction, but nobody talks about the Asian American vote. And my current thesis is that Asian American population is basically concentrated in states where it doesn't make a difference, right? They're not the battleground states. That's my current thesis. I am not a political science person, but
that makes sense though. Right? I mean, you have a lot of Asians in California, Hawaii, they don't matter. Those states don't matter, with the Electoral College, New York. Yeah. Right.
Right. So now as you're seeing kind of the movement like that, maybe it'll change now, but it certainly has felt like this sense of invisibility. And I think that is a very typical like Asian American experience. And there's in Japanese, and granted, Japan is so different than China. It's so different than Korea. It's so different than Thailand. It's it's not a monolith, right? But within Japanese culture, at least, right? This in America, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, and in Japan, the nail that sticks up gets hammered down, right? And so, kind of staying quiet and remaining under the radar is sort of a good thing. And so, when I wrote Cold Call Ninja, it was very much that was sort of the subtext there. And then get called out by wokesters saying I'm racist because it's like, what? That was ridiculous.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it's a joke, and there's a lot of thought obviously behind it, but you shouldn't have to explain it. It's you kind of left it up for interpretation. You got the buy-in. People are laughing from all different races, and it does sound funny. And but there's clearly I don't think people sometimes understand how much thought goes into jokes sometimes, especially when you're talking about race and the invisibility. You kind of talked about, the experience of invisibility that Asians experience, but also you kind of tied it into Japanese culture and almost like a invisibility is not a negative thing necessarily. It's part of the culture too. So it's very complex. But I was wondering, you grew up in Hawaii, and you were saying your experience in Hawaii is different than Asian Americans who grew up on the mainland. When I was in Hawaii, I kind of researched it. I realized that I think at least a third of the population there is Asian American. Is that right?
That's correct.
So obviously that's very different than growing up anywhere on the mainland. Did you experience anti-Asian resentment while you were in Hawaii, given that it was
absolutely not. I mean, it's just like I said, when your senator looks like you, when your Congress people look like you, when the governor looks like you, here's the other thing. My last name in Hawaii, nobody gets it wrong. The people at the grocery store get it right. The people at the bank get it right. Everyone gets it right, even though it's a very unique last name. It's a very unique surname. And just because, it's ubiquitous, we're everywhere. And, I think one of the things I was thinking of, you guys talked about painting with a broad brush and racism painting with a broad brush, and I think one of the things going back to Hawaii and comedy and this idea of racism with a capital R, a lot of people who might look at Hawaii and say oh, you can't joke about that, that's racist, and it's strict liability versus scienter. And I know many of you hate that people drop these legal terms.
Yeah, that's from episode 2 or whatever. I don't remember what episode that was from, but I did say that.
But I think scienter is really important to me, right? And you know, one of the things of, you know, we obviously know the difference between Japanese and Chinese and Koreans because we interact so much with people who, you know, are of Japanese descent, of Chinese descent, of Korean descent, that we can see those. We have our you know, stereotypes of each of these kind of, you know, unique groups. And so it's kind of, I was thinking about it, you know, in the preparation for today of, you know, is racism sort of just like painting with too broad of a brush? Because if you say like, oh, all Asians are X, Y, and Z, versus if you say like, you know, all Chinese from like Wuhan province, you know, like, the more like narrow you get with specificity, you know, does that change the equation? I don't know, but yeah, certainly I don't, I've never experienced any kind of racism in Hawaii. And even on the mainland, I've been really, really lucky. I mean, there's this one time in Charlottesville where I was holding up the door at this
Charlottesville, man.
It's no racism except when I got to Charlottesville. We know that story.
I held up the door for these like two teenagers, these two white kids, and they were like, "Oh, thank you, sir." One kid was like, "Oh, thank you, sir," and the other was
bowed.
Yeah. The second one was like, "Thank you, sir."
Then one hit a gong.
Like, oh, thank you, sir. I cracked up laughing because, like, another thing going back to intent, like this kid wasn't trying to be like rude, you know, like he was just like, I guess he saw kung fu movies or something, and just like, this is how you do it, you know? And I was just like, whatever.
We gotta get Manny's dad on the podcast.
Oh my gosh, yes. So shout out to my dad who actually does listen to this, so he might hear this, but he did that once when we ate at, it's so embarrassing. I wasn't there, but my sisters were there apparently. And they were eating at a Japanese restaurant. And apparently once they left, he just like bowed to, he said, thank you. And he like bowed. My sister said his like pants rode up. It was really weird visual. But we've tried to talk to him about stuff like that. Like, hey, look, just chill. And by the way, he loves Asian culture. Like, for a long time, we actually legitimately, because his dad was his dad was an orphan, so his dad was like adopted. So we don't know where our lineage goes on that side. But my dad, you know, he's mixed up with something. I mean, he's African American, but we're mixed up with white or Native American something. We're not exactly sure. But he liked to say that he thinks that we are there's some Asian in us somehow, somewhere. And I legit would hold on to that because I deeply, deeply wanted to be connected to Asian culture because I love all Asian food. I think the Asian continent has the best food in the country. I mean, in the country, in the world.
I mean, I don't agree. Like, Asian food's bomb. And like when I, you know, traveled, I've been to most of the countries in Asia, and yeah, no, it's pretty great. And one of the things, I mean, there's so many things to unpack here. But I think major point that I was trying to make was, yeah, I wouldn't be offended like when your dad did that. Like, I do that sometimes. Like when I was in Thailand, I'd be like, "Oh, like thank you," like, you know, and so it happened. You know, I'm not, but
you're gonna get canceled, yo. I think you're gonna get canceled.
Yeah, no, it is interesting because it's like, and then some things he would do, and this is where it gets dicey. So if you're like ordering food, he would like slip into like an Asian accent, like that. You gotta stop that at least, you know. Like you could just say unagi. You don't say unagi. Like, you know, it's okay. I think they understand what you're trying to say. That's not how you talk. And I would say like it's like if they were ordering food from you, it's like, hey yo, what up, bruh? Can I get some cornbread and something like? And you know they don't sound like that.
Well, first off, for all of your listeners who don't eat unagi, it's amazing. It's one of my all-time top favorite foods.
I just had some last night.
Oh, it's so good.
It's so good. It
really is. Yeah.
So, by the way, so as you were talking about, you know, writing the first, you know, Asian history or just a representation for Libel Club, I was thinking, Manny, if you remember this, in 2011, there was this story that broke when they did a Fed Club thing where they had a Confederate flag, like with ping pong. Do you remember that?
Yeah, I remember that. That's right. Yeah.
So I, you know, as you were telling that story, and I kept thinking, like, damn, that wasn't like 1811.
Nope, 2011.
Oh, 1911. No, that was 2011, and you had people at the time talking about, like they were just, it was just a joke, like they were just having a party. Like, what's the big deal having a Confederate themed whatever, like ping pong table on the beer pong or whatever they were doing. But anyway, like it just brought me back to kind of like, yeah, that was the environment in Charlotte. I mean, I don't know, in Virginia, in UVA, like it just seemed like this school went through life being a top school, but without ever having to deal with its history in any way or form. Like like nobody confronted anything until whenever. Like, but anyway.
Yeah, because I feel like at UVA, as with all schools in the United States, the default is just we're white, and anyone who deviates from that, we'll decide what category we'll decide what we'll do with your category. We'll decide, how we think of blacks or Asians. I think it's interesting though, Teddy, what you were talking about, like the invisibility piece. I feel as a black person, that's something that we don't deal with. We're not invisible. They know we're there. They might not like it, and they might have certain types of stereotypes or whatever for black people, but we're so ingrained in this country, and sometimes it feels like we're like a cancer that they want to get rid of, but they know it's there. Whereas like Asian Americans, sometimes, I think often, you're just like seen as just invisible, as if, we can make Asian jokes because Asian people, they're there, but whatever. I mean, they're just kind of like flies on the wall. Sometimes we kind of subsume them into white culture, kind of, but not really. Like, so I don't know. I definitely got that vibe when I was at UVA. It's just like the Apolsa and like Asian American students were invisible.
Yeah, I agree 100%. Like, I feel like you could almost make the equivalent of a blackface Asian joke, and it wouldn't, it was like it's just like,
whatever. Yeah, whatever. Meanwhile, like Teddy's sitting right there, and they're just like, okay. They just bow.
Most people don't realize that I'm Asian. They my coworkers think I'm white, but I mean, it's it's one of those things where I think having the conversation. I mean, barbecue, libel show, and one of the other reasons I actually chose UVA was the fact that at least back in 2013 when I was looking where to go, the diversity rates were really, really bad, right? I mean, just in terms of the male female ratio and in terms of people of color, and I just thought like this is an opportunity to go to a state that I'm from Hawaii, so far away, just an opportunity to really sort of see if I can sort of be, have enough of a personality to maybe change people's minds on what a stereotypical Asian is. And like, I say this in a way that like, when I say that Hawaii Asians are so different than like mainland Asians, and of course, it's not a monolith, but like, man, you will not find anyone harsher on Asian, like American men than me. Because like, if I go to a place and I see these Asian dudes, like at a hookah bar, watching anime, this is a true story, watching anime, like eating cup noodle. And I just want to smack the cup noodle off the table. Bro, everyone is looking at you. They're like, oh, these nerdy Asians. And then they look at me and they treat me like that. And no, right? And it's like, I don't know, like, have you seen the movie Crash?
Yes. Yeah.
The scene where Ludacris like tries to rob Terrence Howard and it's like, you disappoint me, right? You disappoint me because like I work so hard as a black man, and then like you're robbing people, you're gonna look at you and right.
This is Teddy's like
little boys, man. I want to smack that out. Like, we went to like a brewery in the area. This is like 2018, and it's like packed on a Sunday, right? Like standing room only. And there's like these 3 Asian boys in pajamas, like with their hair is all awful, right? And they're like sitting there playing like magic cards, drinking water. They didn't buy beer, they didn't buy food. Like, so like the restaurant hates them. All these patrons who are waiting to get a seat hate them. And I'm just like, go home. Like, play your magic cards at home because you are authority, right?
So this is Teddy's niggas versus black people speech.
Nerds, like
nerds versus Asians.
that at home. Do it at home, right? Because it makes my life harder, right? It makes it so much harder for me to have to like, offset that. My personality has to be so much larger to offset all of those kinds of data points that you're seeing, right? And so, it's just my little venting session.
Yeah, that's an interesting point.
So, yeah. So what I was gonna say, have the bell.
Lila's in a church.
The church basement. But anyway, what I was gonna say is that is interesting because, as minorities, as as much as you'd like to just be judged for who you are or what you are individually, like you always have to think about when, at least for me, I always think about when a Black person does something bad, for better or for worse, how you know that, oh my God, like why does that person have to be Black?
Especially when you're with white people, you're like, God damn it. Now I feel like I have to explain, or it's so awkward.
Yeah, I mean, 100%. That's the difficulty. That's the burden of the minority, right? Is that you are representing not just yourself, right? You're representing like this huge group that you're like, I don't want to represent all of that. I don't want that burden. Right? And so it's like, stereotypes of like Asian driving. And every time in Northern Virginia where there's a crash, I'm like, please don't be Asian. You drive by and like, shit, it's an Asian person, right? And like, so the Suez Canal, right? The boat that's like stuck. I'm like, please, Captain, don't be a Asian is can't parallel park. I'm like, no.
It's white people. Yeah. Every time there's a mass shooting, it's white people. Like, fuck. Oh, here we go. Yeah.
Right.
Damn it.
Right. Like, it's just you hope that it's not another statistic. It's like, oh, this is just another data point that's going to be like, adding a stereotype, right?
So that reminds me. One time I was with I used to sell Cutco knives. It's a very random thing I used to do. Anyway, I was with another sales rep who was taking me out, and he was like showing me how to do it. We were in Northern Virginia. This was when I was in college. We were in like Fairfax, and he said something pretty racist. We were in the car, and like we were driving in like a parking lot, and like somebody kind of cut him off. And he was like, "Oh man, I bet they're Asian." I'm like, "Dude, that's so racist." And then the person was Asian. I was like, "Oh no."
Right? It's like, oh please, oh gosh, no. And so like that's the thing. So going back to Hawaii, what's fascinating, right, is that we do have this culture of everyone kind of mixing and melding together, but white people, we call them haole, like Haole, haole, and my haole girlfriend, and so many white people get so offended by being called like haole, and they're like, oh, it's so racist. It's just like the N-word. No, it's not. It's not. Definitely not. Right? And it's just like, but here's the point. It's the first time they feel like they're being labeled. It's the first time they're feeling they're the minority, right? Because now in Hawaii, you ask anybody in Hawaii, what are stereotypical Japanese traits? What are stereotypical Chinese traits? Stereotypical Hawaiian traits? Portuguese traits? Haole traits? Right? They will tell you. Right? They will tell you all of these stereotypical traits, and there's many white people who do not like that being kind of seen as this, having these stereotypes associated with them, right? And it's like, and it's amazing where you see, I'll look through like Yelp reviews or whatever of restaurants, and it's like, some transplant white person, saying like, oh, I just moved to Hawaii 2 years ago, and I went to this restaurant. It's this sushi restaurant, just like, this is a real sushi review. And it was like, and they were so racist to me because like my child doesn't eat sushi. So I asked them if I could bring in McDonald's, and they said no. And they said I couldn't come in. They're racist because I'm white. And it's like, no, they did not let you in because they don't want outside food coming in. Right. But it's the fact that the first time in this person's life, they feel like they're being discriminated against in some way. Right.
Right.
So amazing to me how quickly that idea of like racism or like a discrimination changes once you are now in the minority. And I think every American should feel that way at some point, just to have empathy, right?
Right.
So I wonder, this is a good segue into what I've been thinking for some time. That has to be the reason why a lot of the culture wars in America is, when you have white folks like thinking the country is slipping away from them and all that, especially conservative white folks. That has to play some part in it, where where you have more minorities not taking rights away from white people. It's just more like trying to get to par, right? Where you can say, okay, you're not able to drink from the same water fountain, so you have to stay in line because a black guy got there before you, so he's got to drink first, that kind of thing. But so I mean, I've just always wondered, to what degree what the end game is here, because there was a poll that I saw just a couple of days, just within maybe the last 2-3 days, where it basically, and I don't like bringing politics into this podcast. I know, right?
They're always here.
And I may be butchering this a little bit, but the crux of, if I read that poll, and I can pull it up in a second, if I was reading that poll directly, white Republicans were saying that they are more discriminated against than black people, than any other group of folks. So this is the first time that has happened, where you had white conservatives saying they are the most in a poll. Even like black people, Latinos, they are not saying they are, the percentage of them that that said, okay, they've experienced, like white Republicans, which is a fascinating phenomenon where you're wondering, like, what the hell is going on? Somebody just say, hey, can I slap you? And you say, no, well, you didn't let me slap you because I'm white or I'm conservative. Like, what the hell is wrong with you? Like, what's going on?
Yeah, I think this is the same as the war on Christmas, right? It's like fake outrage that's like non-existent.
Or Dr. Seuss.
Yeah, I mean,
exactly.
Yeah, I mean, if you want to talk about discrimination, I first off, Manny, you're living the dream doing the stand-up comedy, because I would love to do stand-up comedy, but my girlfriend is like, no, because I would talk about too many personal things that she's super private. So
you just have to just do it. You just got to do it.
A best joke I could not use, but I digress. But a stand-up if I had a Netflix comedy special, it'd be called Mediocre Asian, because that's how I feel myself, like mediocre Asian. Like I'm like, I played viola in high school and piano, but like I wasn't state champ, and like I'm good at math, but like I didn't have like a perfect SAT. Like, I'm like, like for the Asians, but like all these like really hardcore, like, state champion, all this stuff, Asians, like they get pulled, and then there's no room for me. And so, if you want to talk about discrimination, I feel like mediocre Asians like myself get really stomped on, but I digress.
I wouldn't call you mediocre, Teddy, but we can say that for the I didn't get a 1600 on the SATs. I got a 1590.
Like, this idea, like white conservatives, and don't get me wrong, like I have some of my best friends in law school were very involved in FedSoc, and I think that diversity of ideas and being able to have those discussions is super important, right? But I think, pushing back.
I just delete you from the stream. I've heard enough.
I mean, we know at some point, I'm gonna come from the left. This idea that I agree that the diversity of ideas is important, but it is not from FedSoc anymore. FedSoc is not where that diversity is coming from. So wherever else it is, I don't know. Maybe we will keep on fighting. We got to figure it out and find it at some point. But no, it's not FedSoc. Where do we go?
So let's so diversity of thoughts though, and in terms of talking to other people, but it's again my central thesis of the importance of feeling that for a moment, and it's very uncomfortable but so important to just feel what it feels like to be a minority in any kind of group, and just to feel different and to feel the weight of the burden of the group.
Mm-hmm.
And
as you're saying this, remember, Manny, when we went to Shanghai, there was this, I don't remember if you were there or maybe I told you, but there was this white guy that was on that trip that basically said, like,
I was there.
Yeah, that I finally get. It was basically saying, you know, when he sees other white folks on the street, like
In
they
China.
put themselves in not. So he was alluding to the fact that this place has so many Asians. Like, duh, it is China.
You are in Asia. Yeah. A lot of people are speaking Mandarin here. I'm not sure what's going on.
Like, they don't speak English here. Like, no shit.
Yeah. No, and I think when he said that to us, and I was like, yeah, welcome to being black in Charlottesville.
Head nod.
Yeah, exactly. Or being black in America, especially, you know, I mean, going into these spaces of higher education, we've been in a lot of like predominantly white spaces. So I'm so used to being othered. It's just like normal. But yeah, there are people who are my age, white people my age, who have never really been othered for a significant amount of time. And, you know, when they do get othered, it's so new and jarring, especially if it happens to you for the first time and you're 35 years old or whatever. And, you know, it feels like extreme racism or something. I don't know what it feels like, but it just feels like, I'm not, you can't put me in a box. You can't say I'm like all these other people. You can't say that I'm different. Exactly. It's like, welcome to being a minority. That's like the default thought of who we are. And until we, you know, I obviously, like, I have plenty of, you know, minority friends. So, you know, I think that's part of the kinship, is that we understand what's going on, and we know what it's like to be othered, and, you know, we know it's bullshit, and we can kind of bond over how it's bullshit and how, like, we're just people, we're just individuals. And there's something really freeing about that, getting to talk to other people who have been othered and realizing that it's, you know, that you understand it's bullshit. But yeah, white people, they've never really been othered like that.
Yeah. You know,
so Teddy, so I'm curious, like, you know, of the copious notes that you've taken of, you know, the podcast, what other things like have you found yourself, like, you know, what are the most controversial things? Let me put it that way.
So we can delete them.
You're like, okay, let's put it out of the archives and talk about.
Yeah, sure. I've got, cancel culture, airplane armchairs. I got great stuff.
Boy, let's talk about
gosh,
that.
yeah. On Facebook, I have this long series because, you know, traveling back to Hawaii from, like, you know, the East Coast, it's oftentimes like, you know, my mom, when I was in law school, like, she'd be like, oh, I really want you home for Christmas, and I will pay for you to come. But she's going to sort by, like, cheapest. And so the cheapest flight is, like, goes from Charlottesville to DC to Cairo to Florida. It's in a box in stereo. 37 days to get all the way to Hawaii, and then you turn around and go back to school. But, you know, it was these very long flights. And so in order to keep myself entertained, I would just kind of keep this, like, you know, I don't have Twitter. It would have been more appropriate on Twitter, but it was sort of like this, like, 47-part, like, adventure of, like, you know, people hogging the chair, the armrest next to you. And so I had this one thing of this dude who just, like, big white guy, you know, puts his arm down. And so I was like, I just put my hand on top of his hand. I was like, okay. And I just, like, looked straight ahead. And, like, bro, we're going to make this awkward. And you just, like, looking ahead. And then away. And then there's other situations where they're putting their leg, I'm, like, in the middle seat, and they're putting their, like, leg in my, you know, leg space. And, like, I don't got, like, I'm this short, chubby Asian guy, right? I don't got long legs, but, like, hey, dude, like, I paid for, you know, that leg space, right? Like, you know, yep.
Yeah.
And so I would just, my technique was I would put on my, like, eye masks, and then I would pretend like I was sleeping, and I would just start coughing. I can't do that anymore. And also regarding masks, you guys had talked in episode 21. You guys talked about mask wearing in Asia, and yeah, absolutely. Like, when I was in Japan for my study abroad, it was like wearing masks, like, to keep other people from getting sick. Like, I was like, that's a beautiful concept. And, like, it's never going to happen in America, because especially if I do it, like, they're going to look at this Asian guy and be like, oh, he has SARS or something like that, you know, like,
yeah.
No way. So it's like, there's no way it's going to happen. But every time I would ride the metro, that's where I would get sick. It was some dude coughing on me. I could feel the spittle on my cheek. I'm like, I'm going to get sick. And I would get sick. And that's every time I got it. And it's like, now we have masks. Thank you. Now it had to take a pandemic to get people to wear masks. You know, but it's a very simple thing.
the one thing that I remember at the beginning of the pandemic when everyone was wearing masks, I would always think about, man, as a black guy, like, you know, wearing a mask into a store.
Yeah, seriously. Yeah.
Like, I don't want to
I'm like, are we?
like, you know, I'm just trying to shop like everyone else. But,
yeah.
But of course, like, since everyone was doing it, it's not a big deal. But what I'm wondering is, as hopefully things get better, if you happen to still have like guys that, you know, just folks in general that my assumption is there are going to be people that continue to mask up for a while. I think, you know, the so-called going back to normal I mean, they're just going to be, maybe they have reasons or whatnot, or they're just not comfortable. So like I'm just curious to see what that would look like societal wise. Like will that lead to a new wave of like exclusion or discrimination or different kinds
for people who wear masks?
Yeah, like it will be an interesting social experiment. Talking about the hand on the hand resting.
Yeah.
I mean, I remember there was this flight I was on. It was a very small plane, and this was by far the worst turbulence I've ever been in. And there was this woman that was sitting with. I mean, this thing was so bad. Like the plane dropped. Like it. I mean, I was convinced that okay, this is it. Like,
jeez,
like it dropped.
Woo!
There were this couple. I don't even know if they were a couple or they were just, you know, co-workers or whatnot. They were just having the chat behind, and it felt like, you know, they weren't even phased at all. Everybody, like they were talking super loud. Like everybody else was kind of like holding their breath. This woman beside me just held my, like, you know, just, you know, picked up my hand and held it. I was like, oh,
I'm gonna be honest. If that happens to me on a plane and I don't know you, I'm gonna hold your hand too.
No, I held her hand, but she looked at me, kind of looked at. I mean, I think I knew what she was feeling at the time. Like she probably felt like, okay, this is it. Like, you know.
Oh yeah.
It was scary. It was. I mean, it wasn't like a normal crazy.
When people
anyway, that wasn't exactly an armrest story, but it, you know, now that I'm thinking back at it, it was a little.
It was both intimate stories you both had with strangers on planes.
Holding hands.
We're holding hands.
Yeah, holding hands with strangers.
Yeah.
But yeah, I just, again, the short, chubby Asian guy, like sort of like the default is like, he's not going to fight back, and it's like, man, okay, well, I'm going to make it super awkward for everybody. Like,
yeah,
he underestimates the level to which I am willing to go to make this very, very awful. So
you have no idea how petty I am. Don't underestimate that shit.
Petty, that's what they call me. No, but so I do. So there's so much stuff to cover on this. I mean, I want to talk top 5 comedians, but I don't know if we're gonna have time to go over all of that. I have my things, the debates, on shit talking Donald Trump, Mike Tyson, Patton Oswalt.
All right, let's do. You want to do the Tyson one? We could do Tyson. You want to just
before we get to Tyson, let's just talk about Trump a little bit because Trump. Why not? Like,
let's do it.
So I mean, this guy is trying to make a comeback, right?
Oh yeah.
I have not been paying attention at all.
I haven't either. But there isn't a way you can't escape Trump stories if he's doing something. Like I saw. I mean, you will see headlines, right? Just he did a bunch of interviews recently, and the one that caught my attention was it seemed like they're saying he's trying to maybe start his own social media company or something like that. Like, what do you all think about that?
He's still banned from Twitter. Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't know. I'm so over Trump, man. My brain, as soon as so I think the reason why I was so fixated on him was because he was in office, right? And you're just concerned, right? There's just a crazy person riding the bus, and you're like, get this. Once the person who's no longer driving, it's like, whatever.
It's easy to ignore if you just yap.
Yeah, I don't care. I mean, he can't hurt me anymore, really. I mean, he's back to what he's supposed to be, which is just a ridiculous pretty funny personality of a person who's not to be taken seriously and not to have any real effect on policies that could affect real people's lives.
Yeah,
so,
I mean, I think you guys nailed it over and over in your different episodes. You talked about just the feeling of being exhausted. And I really think that's so true. And, I posted about, Sleepy Biden being, you can actually get some sleep. And of course, other people have posted about it too.
Yeah.
For the record, Manny, I know, like, for comedy, I do not use other people's jokes. And so if I write anything, I've individually thought of it, and then people will accuse me of stealing it from the internet. I'm like, I don't follow the memes. I'm not cool enough to know what the cool
Right.
memes are, right? But, it's like, and it's so true, right? You look at like the news and it's just like, like nothing really crazy happened. And it's like, that's kind of good. Like, it's nice to not be like, we're one bad bowel movement away from starting World War III. I was always terrified of like, he gets like indigestion and wakes up at 3 a.m. and says something stupid on, because he's
Right.
tummy, because he ate too much, whatever. And just like starts firing off tweets and like starting World War III. And it was just like terrifying. And like, as a Fed, right, we have the Hatch Act. And so much of what I wanted to say had to be kept very quiet. And I would just write it and just keep it in my own file, right, to entertain myself, right?
Right, yeah.
But one of the things, one of the kind of career highlights of last year, we had this final policy rule that I was, one of the drafters of it, so my name is on it and everything. And he talked about it in one of his speeches. And I was like, hey, he's talking about a thing I worked on. And then he immediately starts talking about cows farting, burning statues, and Venezuela. And like, oh, God. Like, he just starts going ranting and doing his comedy routine, right? I mean, it's just like greatest hits, and it's just insane. And it's just exhausting.
Yeah, I mean, the exhaustion is not even, that word is an understatement. I feel like even a good chunk of his supporters, or people that like maybe Trump apologists, if you will, probably also feel the same way now. Like, I think that's why, if you look at, for instance, Biden's polls, right, like it's still sky high, and that's why all this Dr. Seuss thing popped up, because there isn't a way you can demonize the guy. It's not Obama, right? It's not a black guy. It's not Kamala. They're trying to, you have everything. You have all sorts of memes going on. Oh, Kamala is really the president. Biden is not, all this kind of stuff. So
it's boring.
My sense is none of that is landing, because even his supporters probably are like, you know what? Biden is not scary. Not this big man of a person that we have to be worried about, or like you can generate some sort of outrage over. But yeah, I mean, now that it seems like he's trying to make a comeback, I don't know. I don't think it's going to be taken seriously. It's just, I don't think it's going to get any traction, but I don't know.
So if I can, I posted this a long time ago, and my voice is a little bit weird. March 17th, Whitney's car was like stolen from our secured garage, and it was like my voice just went out for some reason. Maybe it's a stress event or whatever.
The car?
I don't know.
You guys got to become friends on Facebook so you can keep up with Teddy's updates.
In 2 weeks, we made 2 police reports, and our fancy building, our luxury, apartment with like, and it was crazy. It was nuts. But anyway, long story short, it's like, it's the craziness that's going outside in the world with all the shootings and stuff, and that, our building that's supposed to have like a security gate and everything, we got hit twice in 2 weeks. It's like, we're not safe. We just don't feel safe anywhere, so kind of crazy. So I think that has like affected my vocal cords, but I would love to do a piece that I wrote a long time ago about Donald Trump. And it's like so one of the, you guys talked a lot about telework and whether we're ever going to go back, and all the, doing stuff. And, the winter storm event, we were all working in our pajamas, and it was great that we were, we're working on all this stuff. And you don't have to do your hair, and you don't have to get your suit ready, and you don't have to take the train. And so, like, for me, like, WMATA is sort of the bane of my existence, and my mental health has been really great because I don't have to take the train, right? And so, back in 2016, kind of the thought of like, what would it take for me to vote for Donald Trump, right? And it was like, if he could fix the Washington Metro Area Transit Authority, I would vote for him, because like I'm just like, I like WMATA. And so this is a piece. Bear with me. I don't know. My impression's not going to be as good because my vocal cords are all messed up, which is why I'm drinking tea. But this is Donald Trump fixes DC Metro.
Okay.
I have been on metros all over the world. I'm going to be honest with you. This city has one of the worst. Have you seen it lately? It's a huge embarrassment. When was the last time DC Metro beat China or Japan? They're kicking our ass. Truly, I would make Metro great again. Donald J. Trump, would fix the Metro in a week, believe me. First, I would call for a complete and immediate firing of all of the lazy, incompetent WMATA staff, a bunch of real losers. We need to hire people who can speak English. Is that too much to ask for? Can anybody understand what the hell these people are saying? And their leader, have you seen the guy, Paul Weidenfeld? Crooked Paul keeps saying they need to stop late night shows. But there's one conductor on the blue line. We'll keep him. I like him. Next, we put Wi-Fi. We put Wi-Fi in every train. Okay. Travelers can download my audiobook, The Art of the Deal. Best business book ever. Second only to maybe the Bible. Some say mine is better. I will. The Apprentice, which I am told by some very smart people is the highest rated TV show ever made. Next, we will rebuild these tunnels and stations, okay? Have you seen it in there recently? So dull and gloomy, just terrible. Need work with lots of gold, marble, something fantastic. When it comes to building, nobody, trust me, nobody builds better than me, trust me. Next, we are going to finally restore law and order in these trains. If somebody plays their music too loudly or takes up 2 seats, knock them the hell out, will you? And babies, I love babies, aren't they cute? No, but seriously, get them out of here. And tourists, they come here and don't know which station to get off on. They block the doors. They're bringing matching outfits. They're bringing large groups of middle schoolers, and some of them I assume are decent people. We need to start protecting our borders. I'm calling for a complete shutdown of all tourists in Metro until we can figure out who these people are, okay? These people are taking more seats. The government says that we're at 12% standing room. The real number is 45%, maybe even 90%. That's what my people are telling me, okay? We need seats. We need them now. I promise to get them back for you. We'll all have seats again. You're going to have so many seats, you won't know what to do with them. We're going to make DC Metro great again, folks. Believe me.
That's great. That is good stuff.
Good.
I would have voted for him if he did that. But
that was a pretty good impression.
That was a good impression. I, even with whatever you said was wrong, your voice, it sounded good to me. So
yeah,
that is.
I've always tried to do his impression, but you know, with the accent and everything, I never could pull it off.
He is funny. It's entertaining to watch people do his impressions, and if it does sound like him, like his voice is just funny, and the way he talks, and you know, it is comical. I've seen some people do some pretty good stand up on Trump, you know, and some of it again and it's hard. It's not easy because a lot of stuff. Everyone just, you know, it gets the joke, right? Everyone is so hack, you know, it's like, okay, yeah, we all think the same thing. But like when you really have like a unique perspective, it can be pretty funny doing Trump. So. Yeah,
it's just, I'm sleeping better. Let's put it that way. I'm sleeping better.
Yeah. I'm telling you, when Joe Biden won in November, when he was elected, I slept better than I had in years. Like that night, November 8th or whatever it was, that was the best sleep I had in a long, long time.
Yeah. See, for me, I did as well. I just had this relief, but I remember still thinking all the way to that January 6th fiasco that, man, is there a 1%? Like, I'm thinking to myself, like, is there like a 5% chance that something crazy could happen in Congress? Now, the way I rationalize it, if somebody told you that, hey, man, if you go into that church down there, you have a 5% chance of dying, you're going to think about it differently. Like, like, you know, even though it's a low chance, but it's kind of like, okay.
Yeah, you never.
Because I'm like, these Republicans in Congress, like, and some of these Republicans in all these states, they've become beyond sycophantic to his antics. So I'm like, do you really trust that they wouldn't try and do something? So I had that lingering at the back of my head. But of course, he had to go around and incite insurrection or whatnot, and but anyway.
I mean, that didn't surprise me. It didn't surprise you guys, right? Like none of that. Like we've all been paying attention. Like none of that was surprising. Like
it didn't surprise me, but I remember watching it live, like because I was working, and normally I don't watch TV when I'm working. Like I just had the TV on just because I was like, okay, let's see. And I just remember why it was kind of silent, right? Like I'm like, no, this is not normal. This is not.
Yeah, it was such a weird day. We were all working. It was like in the afternoon. It's like, are we supposed to still email things about work while the insurrection's happening? Like everyone was confused. Like, are we supposed to pretend this isn't happening? What's going on? How is anyone not staring at the TV right now?
Yeah.
Like,
so
it was a weird day. But I mean, yeah, it was like it wasn't surprising, but still seeing it, it was just like this is. Yeah, I had a lot of emotions about it, and I was like, this is just. I was the first emotion I had, which surprised me, was just sad. It was just like that people, even though I don't necessarily understand why they feel so displaced and discriminated against and all this stuff and oppressed, but I felt sad for them that they felt that oppressed. You know what I mean? Like, and it was based off of Trumpism and lies and all this stuff, but it was still a sad feeling. It's like, I guess I know what it feels like to be a part of a group that feels like that, and to see it, it was just like, yeah, it's never a good thing when you see people are upset enough to start breaking things, and they just don't care anymore. It's the same type of sadness I get when I see the protest. Now, I actually agree with the protest related to like George Floyd and stuff. I mean, I sympathize with that cause, but it's still that same level of sadness that you get when you see stuff when people are so frustrated and so angry that they don't care anymore.
So like I didn't feel that level of sadness like that. For me, I think one of the thoughts that I had was these, and I think I may have said this on the podcast as well, where America and its citizens keep telling themselves that they are the best. Like, when you keep telling yourself that you're better than everyone else, not just people in your country, but people in other countries, like, we are the best, we are this, we are that. And at some point you start eating your own dog shit you think is okay, like you think is sushi, and you think it's gourmet meal, and I think to some degree it was a culmination of that, like, where you have people that just like, what, no, like this isn't what we've been sold or whatnot, and they now have a foil for that, which is all these other folks, like, and that whole insurrection thing, I didn't necessarily see it as people fighting for an election that was stolen. I saw it as something bigger than that. I saw it as an extension of, the Tea Party and all of the hate against, minorities. I mean, like the backlash against George Floyd, the backlash against Barack Obama's election, against Kamala Harris. So I saw it as an extension of that, like a country that is trying to move forward and make a progress a certain way. And you have these people. So I didn't feel bad, or I didn't feel the level of sadness that you felt. I just felt like, yeah, this democracy is so fragile that it just takes for a bunch of folks to say, you know what, nope, we don't believe in this anymore, and that's it. Like, we always with something that's supposed to be ceremonial, right? That whole thing about counting in Congress on January 6th, that's not necessary. Like, technically, the election has been had in November. We already know who won. Whatever they're doing January 6th is a nonsensical step. But it has now become this thing where, okay, everybody used to agree that, we just move on. And yeah, like, democracy is not this ordained thing. This divinely ordained thing is just a bunch of agreements that we as American citizens have agreed to, like, to just follow and abide. So, and it just takes a bunch of folks to say, you know what, we don't agree anymore, and it is that fragile.
Yeah. I mean, I feel a little bit of, I think, leaning more towards how Manny feels, of just like a lot of sadness and just seeing those images, because when I worked for Senator Inouye, like I walked those halls, I'm very familiar with those buildings, and watching that happen, what was hard to watch, was really hard to watch. It was not surprising given the amount of misinformation that's out there and like fanning the flames. And it's scary because I think in the same way that the pandemic, who could have seen this coming? Like a lot of people saw this coming. Bill Gates a year ago. I mean, Netflix had the pandemic, like a pandemic, TV or show series a year ago. Like, I mean, not a year ago, a year prior from March 2020. Where Bill Gates is like, this is what's going to happen. Like, we should all be worried. Similarly, this was totally foreseeable, and I think it's going to be potentially something that we'll be dealing with in the future. I was. I sat in on an ABA law conference on national security, and one of the speakers at the very end, who has been in the space for 40-something years, he's just revered. He's a Republican, but he said something that was so profound, and he said, if you look at the breakdown, certainly at some other point, we'll talk more about electoral college. But if you look at the breakdown of the popular vote and the electoral college vote, and you look at the county vote, right? More counties voted red than blue. But if you look at obviously the counties that have like tons of population, right? That's like where all the blue counties are. When you break it down into the economic productivity of those blue counties, it dwarfs the red counties, like dwarfs, and it's increasingly becoming so. And his perspective was that is a major national security issue that he sees. That what we saw on January 6th is that frustration, resentment, feeling, oppression, because there are certain voices on Fox News and OAN and whatever that are saying that there's these problems that are kind of these fake boogeyman, that they're taking away Christmas. Only that Melania Trump doesn't give a shit about Christmas, right? Apparently, per her.
Right. Yeah.
Right? And so this fake outrage. But fanning the flames, and I think even more so per this, the guru of national security is we should be kind of concerned about this, right? As we see more and more that consolidation of opportunity and economic growth happening in those blue counties, right? We're going to see more and more red counties feeling that pressure.
I agree 100%. That's my concern more than anything, because I think that we haven't seen the worst of it. So whatever happened January 6th is just the iceberg. Yeah. If you think about what is now going on electorally now in the country, right, where there are over 250 bills that they're that you have Republican, state houses or trying to pass on voter suppression. That is a party that knows that they're governing from from a minority position. That they know that the population doesn't favor them anymore. The only thing that they have now is to just figure out a way to make sure that the other side doesn't vote blatantly. I mean, otherwise, the idea that you're going to criminalize giving water to people standing in line in Georgia, that doesn't pass at this. Like, I mean, I don't know what to say to that. So, and that is only going to get worse, because there is no fair way that you can't, because what's going to happen is, let's assume Georgia, right? The next senatorial election is just next year, 2022. Warnock is going to run again. If he wins again, despite that, because there is so much that you can do. If the population is if you just have more people on one side than the other, unless you start killing people, there isn't a lot you can do to stop them, right? So maybe you can win, the local elections because you've gerrymandered stuff or whatnot. You can still continue to win that, but over time too, that will also catch up. But when you talk about statewide, that has nothing to do with anything. It's just a numbers game. Like, so when that happens again, what is going to be the next step? Like, does anybody really know? Like, because I'm thinking I was actually concerned with the runoff because I was thinking to myself, if the Democrats had lost that would have been evidence that Trump and his minions will have used that. Wait a minute, we actually won Georgia. And I actually don't know what would have happened. If they lost that runoff election in January, do you really know what would have happened? Like, would
definitely fan the flames more.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's difficult to make the case when you lost that election 2 times in a row, and every time the margins got bigger. And they counted and recounted and recounted. They counted like 3 times, right? So it's like, okay, what are we doing here? So, but anyway, yeah. So my own concern more than anything is just kind of like, I think the republic is imperial. Like, and maybe there is no going back. That's kind of like how I feel right now. Like, maybe there is no going back. Like, you can kind of like dance around the edges and whatnot. I think some of these folks, they've been fed so much misinformation. I mean, when you have, a not insignificant percentage of the of a major party in this country that believe in QAnon conspiracies, we're not living on the same planet. So we're not even talking about having a discussion based on facts. We don't even agree on the facts. So
yeah, well, that's been apparent for a while now.
I should also note that QAnon is Q clearance, and that's a Department of Energy security clearance. So if I ever see any blood, in the hallways or anything like that, I'll let you guys know.
Oh boy.
Yeah, please.
It's crazy. It's scary, and I think we all have to be super vigilant, moving forward. And I think, how do you fight back against, how these algorithms can target people and get them, you kind of go down this path of, click on something and then it suggests other stuff. And all of a sudden now you're wearing tinfoil hats and stuff, and I think the importance of critical education and critical thinking, like, it's got to start in the school level, like, question things, think deeply, having conversations. And it's hard because, Manny, you said in episode 21 that, you would spend hours and days trying to convince
people.
People.
Making up episode numbers
no,
now.
No, it's episode 21. It was episode 21.
It's like
you guys talked about the Winter Storm,
22.
Paradox of choice, and I have a lot of stuff. But
wait, what did I say on that?
I think it was episode 21. About arguing with trolls and like debating people.
Oh, right. Yeah.
Spending hours and days, and one of a very powerful concept that has changed kind of how I interact with the world is this notion of a Pyrrhic victory, a victory where even though you win, you've sustained so much loss that it's really a loss, right? And
right.
You spend 5 hours of your time crafting this brilliant argument only for the guy to be like, whatever, bro. And like, you won.
Exactly.
You won, but you just wasted 5 hours of your life, right?
Right.
And
so much psychic and emotional energy was wasted.
Wasted, right? Instead of like, and so it's so hard. How can we spend our energies to interact with people in a meaningful way that can actually kind of start those conversations, and I have family members, everyone on Facebook is familiar with like the crazy auntie who just kind of comes in and just starts putting these links to these crazy conspiracy things. And like, everyone just kind of blasts her. Hey, anyone can say whatever they want, but like, if you come to my space and you say some crazy stuff, people are going to like check you, And so, but at what point is it kind of a lost cause to spend energy talking and having those kind of conversations? At what point? And those are hard questions, right? Because ultimately those are the conversations that need to be had, the tough conversations, the hard conversations. I think the fact that, 2 Black guys and an Asian guy are having these conversations about these tricky subjects from our different perspectives, I think is so important, right? Because we see things a little bit differently, but then we see certain things the same. And I think having a MAGA guy, I mean, Lay's gonna be like, no ways, absolutely not. But like, for me, I'd be cool with like sitting down and just like talking, because ultimately, right, it all comes from some kind of insecurity or some kind of deep-seated fear, right? That is pushing people toward doing or believing certain things, right? This like a scarcity mindset, like, oh, the reason that my job is taken away from me is because the blacks or the immigrants or the Muslims or whomever it is, right? And usually it's like, oh, technology or a shift in something else, but it's so much easier to blame. But it all comes from this deep insecurity, right? This fear, and we're not having those kind of conversations. I don't know how we're going to be able to move forward as a country, and it's scary.
So I am not against having conversations. I think it's more like you should just. It's kind of like the lost cause thing that. For me, I feel like I'm just more practical. I'm like, look, it is unlikely that I'm going to get any mileage from this conversation. Let's face it. Like I would talk to you, but it's only going to be to an extent. Like, just say my own piece and that's it. Like, it's not a question of trying to convince them because unfortunately, we all have echo chambers now. And you were talking about algorithms, and it is so easy to just box people into. I mean, you have folks like people that you quote unquote think that they should know better. Doctors, lawyers, that are falling prey to this whole thing. So that tells you that this is what radicalization looks like. This is what it looks like when you have a society that has intentionally targeted and misinformed. I mean, this is how atrocities happened in the past, where you have when you have the powerful kind of like systemically and systematically just feed information to radicalize their population. There was a poll that came out just this past week that talked about, for the first time, Americans have this anti-China. It reflected in the polls, like kind of like they now see China as the worst country or something like that. The worst geographical threat, something to that effect. That doesn't happen out of a vacuum. Like, when you have this constant feeding of anti-Asian, people talking about China, even regular folks, someone like me, when I hear the president, even Trump, saying stuff about China there is a way that affects even someone like me, right? Even my and that is where people talk about subconscious bias, right? There's a way it affects me. Like if I was having a conversation during the last World Cup about whether to go to Russia or not. I'm like, oh, I don't want to go to Russia. Why did I feel that way? It's because of anti-Russian propaganda that there is nothing worse that will happen in Russia that can't happen anything else. If I went to, anywhere else, and I'm afraid that is also the same thing that is happening to, with China, right? Like, it used to be this country that everybody laughed at. Now, you're getting Americans comfortable that, we can just go throw an atomic bomb in the middle of Shanghai and that's okay. So this whole, it's a bigger problem than this is like, like it is an insert. I don't want to call it interesting, because interesting makes it kind of sound flippant or like, this exotic thing. But it is a scary social experiment that we're witnessing, where, we are seeing the radicalization of Americans for the worse.
Yeah.
Well, on that note, come to the end of
Cheery future ahead of us. I mean, I hate to say this, but some days I'm cheering for Skynet. I'm cheering for the robots some days, and Thanos and come and just like, we're like, it's kind of nuts out there. But I still remain hopeful. I still remain hopeful despite it feeling like the end of Empire Strikes Back with like all the,
Yeah, I think the thing to think about is you do have to be vigilant, but we've been through a lot of shit in the past, and but anytime I think about stuff that's getting too dystopian, I try to remember there was a book I read, and I can't remember what it was called, but it was something to the effect of things aren't as bad as they seem. Like if you look at the world globally, we're actually getting better. If you look at like poverty and hunger, and we're not fighting nearly as much. There's nowhere near as much violence in the world as there was 100 years ago, 200 years ago. There are less wars. There's more education, and so if we, be realistic, but also focus on the actual statistics. It's easy to watch the news and see. Of course, they're going to show you what's going on that's wrong and what's going to sell. People don't want to hear about, poverty has gone down in third world countries. That's not interesting. People want to hear about what Trump tweeted or whatever. But so like, yes, I mean, definitely stay vigilant. And it's not like progress is completely linear and goes up like that. And, there will be backlash and things like that. But I think overall, as humanity, we're getting better. So hopefully that helps listeners not be too scared. But I definitely hear what you're saying, live, for sure. Like there are definitely things to be concerned about.
Yeah. So Teddy, any last words for the folks?
No, I just want to thank you guys for bringing me on. I mean, I think you guys have really a great show, great opinions. There's so much stuff that at some point, maybe offline, we'll discuss. We'll debate our top 5 comics because there's so much to unpack there.
I'm so interested. We could always have you back. So this doesn't.
I'd love to come back.
This doesn't have to be the last time. I really enjoyed having you on. I thought you've always been great to talk to ever since we've been kind of chatting through Facebook and the time we hung out that one time in DC. And so I knew you'd be interesting. So I'm glad we had you on. But yeah, thanks again for stopping by. Also, I do want to just say we're going to stop the live stream, but you don't have to get off right away. Sometimes people will stop the live stream and they think that they have to leave. So you don't have to. We can chat a little bit after we stop going live. But Lai, you have anything else to say?
No, man. I mean, stay positive, stay strong. The funny thing is, despite everything that I said, I'm actually a very positive and happy person. I'm happy. Like I'm actually the happiest I've been. So but I'm
after that doom and gloom, like, oh
no,
you don't want to see what he's upset.
I don't see what I'm saying as doom and gloom. I just see like this is reality. Like as I was saying, that was the pose, right? I was saying, hey,
right, yeah.
People are now thinking this way about. So I'm like, hey, do we want to say something about it? Do we want to do something about it? But anyway, I'm the happiest I've been. So for everyone, you'll be Aight.
I guess the last thing I want to say is like being from Hawaii, we are the Aloha state, right? And this is something that everywhere I go, I talk about it. Aloha is this concept, this very nebulous concept, right? There's like 24 definitions of what is aloha. And I think of it as being like love and empathy and kindness and willingness to share. And it is something that I think Hawaii people, it is, a traditionally Hawaiian concept, right? It is a exclusively Hawaiian concept, but people who look like me, who are 4th generation Hawaii, we all live this spirit. I have this aloha shirt on, right? There's a blood stain here from a stranger's blood, right? On the Washington Metro, a guy fell. Geez. A guy fell, hit his head. He was bleeding everywhere. I ran to help him, right? And I wrote that it would be a real shame if I wore an aloha shirt but did not act with aloha, with love. And I think it is something that this tiny rock in the middle of the Pacific, the most isolated body on the planet, is our greatest export, is something that we can share with the world. And so that's kind of what I would leave your listeners with, is to live life with aloha, to live life with kindness and generosity and caring for one another, because we have to ultimately care for each other because it's getting crazy out there. And so that's what I got to say.
I think UBI is just the black version of that.
No worry, beef curry.
All right, y'all. I'm gonna end it now, but you be all right.
Yeah.